Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York International Airport buzzed like a human hive. Rolling suitcases, shrill announcements, and the hurried pace of travelers created an orderly chaos. Among this sea of faces, a black man in his 40s stood out for his presence and singular calm. Darius Johnson. He walked elegantly, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit and carrying a simple but luxurious suitcase. His gaze, clear and calm, observed the surroundings with the serenity of someone who knows exactly where he is going. Yet beside him, danger lurked beneath the blue uniform of Officer Richard Collins, an arrogant police officer known for his subtle but persistent racism. Collins saw Darius not as a traveler, but as a potential problem, and he would not hesitate to humiliate or control anyone who did not fit his prejudices. At that moment, Darius was still unaware that their meeting would reveal not only Collins's true flaws, but also the invisible power Darius carried with him. For behind that calm face was hidden the owner of Sky High Airlines, the company that dominated the skies over America, and soon Collins' life would be plunged into humiliation and astonishment. The terminal, with its mixture of lights, noises and hurried glances, became the scene of a silent confrontation between perceived authority and real power, and that morning, no one suspected that injustice was going to receive its just revenge. Darius Johnson approached the counter of Sky High Airlines, his calm footsteps echoing lightly on the polished terminal floor. He took out his boarding pass and passport with the calmness of someone with nothing to hide. Yet, this simple gesture caught the attention of Officer Richard Collins, which was patrolling nearby. Collins, accustomed to wielding his authority with arrogance, rushed toward Darius. "Hey! You! Stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking like thunder in the hall. Darius looked up and replied calmly, "Good morning, officer. What can I do for you? Show me your ID. Now." Collins pointed accusingly. "I don't trust you." The passengers around him began to observe the scene, some frowning, others frozen, uneasy. Darius, without losing his composure, held out his passport and boarding pass. Collins quickly inspected them and frowned. Everything's in order," he muttered. Then, turning to the witnesses, he added with a condescending smile, "But you should know that I keep an eye on such people." Darius felt cold anger rise within him, but he kept his face impassive. "Officer," he said in a low but firm voice, "before you judge someone, make sure you are not judging through your prejudices." Collins snorted, thinking it was just a banal warning. "I'm doing my job. You should be grateful I'm not arresting you right here, in front of everyone." At that moment, Darius knew it was time to turn the situation to his advantage. He knew Collins was unaware of a capital truth: Darius Johnson was not just a traveler. He was the owner of Sky High Airlines, the very one Collins served on a daily basis, oblivious to the real hierarchy. And that day, Collins's illusion of authority would shatter, in front of every witness in the terminal, in a way no passenger would ever forget. Collins stood up straight, proud of himself, still believing he had the upper hand. He had humiliated so many travelers before, thinking his uniform gave him unquestioned authority. But what he didn't know was that Darius Johnson possessed patience and tactical intelligence far superior to his own. Darius took a deep breath and said calmly, "Officer Collins, I understand that you're doing your job. But perhaps we should inform your superior if you continue to target customers without reason." Collins frowned. "I don't need permission to enforce security here." Darius gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Of course, but I suppose your job becomes more difficult when your superiors discover that you are being guided by your prejudices, don't you?" The passengers around him began to murmur. Some looked up, intrigued by the scene. Darius spoke calmly, but each word struck with precision, exposing Collins's arrogance and implicit racism. Collins, taken aback, felt the tension rising. He was used to intimidating others, but for the first time, he was meeting someone who showed no fear and seemed to read his intentions perfectly. Darius continued, his voice measured. "You know, officer, I've spent years building this company. I've hired thousands of people, created jobs, and invested in the safety and comfort of passengers. And you treat me like I'm just a suspect? Collins stepped back slightly, uncomfortably, as a few passengers began to whisper among themselves. Doubt crept into his mind, but he still refused to lose face. Darius then made a subtle gesture toward the counter, where a Sky High Airlines employee was waiting. Perhaps you could check with the receptionist who's in charge here. I'm sure they'd be happy to clarify the situation. Collins's gaze twitched. He felt like he was losing control, but he couldn't prove anything yet. And that was the precise moment Darius decided to remain silent, leaving Collins to struggle with his arrogance in front of an increasingly attentive audience. Collins was beginning to lose his composure. His hands were shaking slightly and his face was contorted, but he refused to show how unsettled he was. The passengers around them whispered among themselves, some pulling out their phones to film, intrigued by the strange confrontation. Darius, on the other hand, remained almost preternaturally calm. He knew exactly when and how to strike, not violently, but with a precision that would leave Collins defenseless. "Officer Collins," Darius said in a clear, steady voice, "you seem confused. Perhaps we should check with someone more familiar with the Sky High Airlines hierarchy." Collins gritted his teeth. I do what I have to do." Darius nodded slowly, almost sympathetically. "Of course. But I'm sure you wouldn't want to misunderstand the situation and embarrass your security service, would you?" He made a subtle gesture toward a receptionist, who stepped forward tentatively. The clerk looked at Darius hesitantly, then whispered, "Mr. Johnson, are you the owner?" A shudder ran through Collins. His arrogance collapsed at once. The man he had just humiliated was the very owner of the company he served. His throat tightened, his pride trampled by his own racism. Darius, without blinking, smiled slightly. "Yes, Officer Collins. I'm Darius Johnson, the owner of Sky High Airlines. And it seems you've just humiliated the man who should have been overseeing your work from the start." The passengers' murmurs turned into shocked exclamations. Collins, pale and bewildered, stammered, Is not." Darius interrupted him, in a calm but icy tone. "I believe, officer, that it is time for you to reflect on your actions. You treat your passengers with respect and fairness, or you risk losing your position and tarnishing your reputation." Collins stepped back, unable to come up with a reply. The passengers stared at him, some smiling with satisfaction, others shocked by the injustice he had just suffered. Darius, meanwhile, retrieved his suitcase and walked towards the counter, leaving Collins alone, humiliated but learning the hardest lesson of his career. The airport terminal seemed suspended in time. Every passenger held their breath, aware that what they had just witnessed was not just an ordinary altercation. Collins, still frozen, looked at Darius with a mixture of fear and shame. Darius walked calmly to the counter, his clear voice echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to apologize for the incident you just witnessed. It is unacceptable that a passenger should be treated in this way, simply because of the color of their skin." The passengers murmured, some clapping quietly. Darius continued, without raising his voice. "The man you see here, Officer Collins, is supposed to ensure the safety and respect of every traveler. But his actions show a serious failure of judgment and professionalism." Collins tried to protest, but Darius cut him off with a gesture. "I believe it is important that we all understand a lesson today. Power or uniform do not give us the right to judge or humiliate others." Darius then signaled to the receptionist. "As the owner of Sky High Airlines, I want to assure you that action will be taken. Collins, you will be suspended and required to complete mandatory training on fairness and respect for passengers." A shocked silence greeted this announcement. Collins, flushed with shame, bowed his head, unable to argue. The audience, however, was becoming increasingly receptive to Darius's commanding accuracy and calm. Darius turned to the passengers. "Let this serve as a reminder to all that dignity and respect are not dependent on the color of one's skin or the uniform one wears. They are a fundamental right." As he retrieved his suitcase and walked toward the boarding area, many passengers began applauding and filming the incident. The video of Darius, calm and powerful, chasing Collins quickly went viral on social media, transforming the incident into a symbol of justice and resilience. Darius had barely left the counter when passengers' phones began buzzing en masse. Videos of the confrontation between Collins and Darius were already circulating on social media, accompanied by outraged comments and massive support for Darius. Collins, still frozen by the counter, realized that his mistake was not only personal, but now public. His name, his face, and his humiliating behavior were exposed to thousands, even millions of viewers within hours. In the quiet of his office, Darius discreetly monitored the situation via his phone. He didn't just want to restore his dignity, he wanted to turn this moment into a lesson in justice and responsibility. A few journalists quickly arrived at the airport, attracted by the viral videos. Darius agreed to give a short interview. Today was an isolated incident, but representative of a larger problem. Every individual deserves respect and dignity, regardless of their skin color or appearance. The media captured the stark contrast between Darius's calm confidence and Collins's subdued arrogance. Soon, articles and reports were chronicling not only Collins's humiliation, but also Darius's example of leadership and self-control. Collins, meanwhile, was sinking into shame. He tried to justify his actions to his colleagues and superiors, but his excuses rang hollow and implausible. His professional reputation was now tarnished. Even his previously lenient superiors realized they could no longer ignore the incident. Darius, for his part, remained calm and strategic. He knew that the real victory lay not in the immediate humiliation of Collins, but in the lasting lesson that this incident would offer to all: respect and dignity are not negotiable, and authority misused always ends up turning against the one who exercises it. Hours after the incident, Collins was in a meeting with his superiors at Sky High Airlines. Pale and trembling, he tried to downplay the seriousness of his behavior. "It was just a misunderstanding," he stammered. "I was just enforcing security." But his words rang hollow. The videos had already been viewed by thousands of people and were circulating on social media. The visual proof of his arrogance and racism was irrefutable. Darius, for his part, calmly monitored the situation from his office. He had been careful not to personally attack Collins in the media, preferring to let the truth come out on its own. His strategy was clear: to show justice, not revenge. Collins' superiors, embarrassed by the media coverage and negative public reaction, had no choice but to immediately suspend Collins and send him to follow mandatory training on fairness and respect for passengers. Collins felt panic rise within him. He had believed his uniform gave him absolute power, but he had just discovered that true authority lay not in threats or intimidation, but in mastery, knowledge, and respect for the truth. In the days that followed, Darius received messages from passengers and colleagues praising him for his dignity and courage. The media praised his patience and intelligence, turning the incident into an example of leadership and resilience. Collins, meanwhile, had to face the shame of his behavior in front of his colleagues and the public. His attempt to fight back had failed, and he now had no control over the story. Darius, with his legendary calm, knew that the next chapter must seal the lesson once and for all, to show that Collins' humiliation was not revenge, but a natural consequence of his actions. The day after the incident, national media picked up the story of Darius Johnson and Officer Collins. The videos went viral, and the public was closely following every detail. Darius had agreed to a few strategic interviews, choosing his words carefully. "What happened yesterday wasn't just an individual confrontation," Darius explained to the cameras. "It's a reminder that authority must be exercised responsibly. No individual should be subjected to humiliation or injustice because of the color of their skin or their origins." His words were striking in their calm and power. The contrast between Collins's collapsed arrogance and Darius's total control captivated the audience. Collins, now suspended, saw his reputation plummet. Colleagues and friends looked the other way, embarrassed by his behavior, while passengers and internet users praised Darius's integrity and composure. In social media, hashtags such as #RespectComeDarius and #JusticeBordis were multiplying. Leadership and civil rights experts analyzed the situation, using the incident as example of conflict management and personal dignity. Darius, true to his style, had never shouted, never attacked Collins, he had let the truth speak for itself. His strategy was simple but effective: real power lies in patience, wisdom, and respect for others. Even Sky High Airlines, which until then had been a simple company for the public, took on a symbolic dimension. Darius showed that a company can reflect the values of its leader, and that respect and justice are never compromised. Collins, humiliated but living the direct consequences of his actions, now had to reflect on his prejudices and how he exercised his authority. The lesson was clear and visible to all: injustice, when exercised arrogantly, always ends up backfiring on the one who imposes it. Days after the confrontation, Collins tried to salvage his career. He wrote letters of apology to superiors and sent private messages to Darius, hoping to gain clemency or understanding. "Mr. Johnson, I am deeply sorry. It was unprofessional. I beg your pardon," Collins wrote, his hesitant tone betraying genuine fear. Darius read the messages calmly and replied with implacable sobriety. "Officer Collins, your apology is noted. But the real lesson lies not in immediate forgiveness, but in your ability to change your behavior and acknowledge your mistakes." At the same time, Sky High Airlines issued a statement reiterating the importance of respect and fairness to all passengers, strengthening Darius's position and making it clear that Collins no longer had any power. Collins also attempted to explain himself to the media, but each interview turned into a disaster. The videos of the incident, combined with his clumsy statements, further reinforced the public perception of his arrogance and racism. Darius, meanwhile, calmly continued his daily routine, undistracted by Collins's maneuvers. He let time and the truth take their course. Collins's actions, instead of repairing his image, only served to illustrate the lesson of patience, justice, and control which Darius had just taught to the whole country. The public now saw Darius as a model of quiet power, a man capable of reversing a humiliating situation without ever losing his composure, and of transforming injustice into a universal example of dignity and respect. A few weeks after the incident, Sky High Airlines held a mandatory meeting for all security personnel. Collins was summoned to explain himself to his colleagues and management. Darius, present but calm, watched the scene from the back of the room. Collins entered, visibly nervous, aware that this moment would be decisive for his career and his image. The security director spoke. "Officer Collins, we have reviewed the videos, your reports, and witness statements. Your actions at the airport were unacceptable." Collins tried to protest, but Darius intervened in a calm but firm voice. "Officer Collins, what you did was not only unfair, but contrary to the values of this company. Humiliating a passenger because of their skin color can never be tolerated." Collins's colleagues stared at him, some with surprise, others with a faint smile of satisfaction. Collins, flushed with shame, looked down. He knew he would never regain the trust of his superiors or the public. Darius added, with a gentleness that contrasted with the gravity of the situation. "True authority is not measured by the uniform you wear, but by how you treat others. You had the opportunity to demonstrate your professionalism and respect, but you failed." Collins could only nod. The lesson was clear, public, and irreversible. Darius had turned a personal humiliation into a universal lesson, showing that patience, self-control, and justice always overcome arrogance and racism. By the time Darius left the room, everyone on staff knew the confrontation had changed not only Collins, but the company culture as well. The message was clear: respect and dignity are uncompromising, and any attempt at injustice ends up turning against the one who imposes it. Days after the final confrontation, the story of Darius Johnson and Officer Collins continued to be talked about across the country. National and international media outlets reported on the incident, highlighting calmness, intelligence, and dignity. Darius's confrontation with Collins' arrogance and racism. Sky High Airlines took the opportunity to reinforce its values: respect, equality, and safety for all passengers. The company quickly became a symbol of excellence and fairness in the airline industry. Collins, for his part, had to publicly accept the suspension decision and undergo mandatory training. His reputation was permanently tarnished, and he learned, painfully, that authority without respect or moral conscience always ends up turning against the person who holds it. Darius, in his office, watched the videos and messages of support pouring in. Thousands of passengers thanked him for his mastery and accuracy. He knew that the real victory was not just personal, but social. He had shown that respect, patience, and intelligence always overcome hatred and arrogance. A few months later, training programs for security personnel and law enforcement began to incorporate lessons learned from the incident, citing Darius as an example of leadership and justice. His lesson had extended beyond the airport TOA national model, inspiring those who believed that injustice could never be corrected. As Darius prepared to board his next flight, he smiled, calm and confident. The world had seen his dignity and strength. The lesson was etched in their minds: no arrogance, no racism, no injustice can survive in the face of truth and respect. And so, a simple incident at the airport became a story of justice, humility, and quiet power, leaving a lasting imprint on the hearts of all who witnessed the confrontation.